Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, released in 2008 for the PlayStation 3, was a supposed end to the Metal Gear Solid series and the finale to the story of Solid Snake. Being a game directed by Hideo Kojima, it's nothing short of incredibly weird. Like the games that came before it, Metal Gear Solid 4 is a both goofy and philosophical stealth action game featuring war, homoeroticism, and giant robots with nukes. The Metal Gear games had constantly been revolutionary up until the release of MGS4, both in matters of gameplay and themes explored in games. The predecessor to MGS4, the titular Metal Gear Solid 3, was the crown jewel of the PS2 era, considered by many to be not only the best in the series, but simply one of the best games ever made. Anyone who's experienced Snake Eater, myself included, can probably tell you the same. So needless to say, Metal Gear Solid 4 had a lot to live up to. I could go on and on about how Metal Gear Solid 4 is no match to its predecessors, but to me that's not what the comparison should be about. I initially intended this to be a review of the game, but the truth is, I just can't create a solid verdict on it. I've played it over, rewatched cutscenes, recompleted levels, etc., but I just can't decide if I love it or hate it. It's divisive not just for Metal Gear fandom as a whole, but also for me personally. There's a lot to love and a lot to hate, really. The gameplay is definitely a big part of this. Drebin points, which are used to buy and unlock weapons as opposed to simply finding them like in prior games, felt like a good concept at first, but oddly having an abundance of weapons made the inventory feel convoluted, and half the time ammo I picked up would be for a gun I had never used. I didn't like the over-the-shoulder view, as like many players I was used to the first-person aiming of prior games. Luckily, it can be changed from the get-go, and there are a lot of different weapons and methods of playing to suit each individual style. The portions of the game I did try to play with the new aiming, although the method worked easier with the gameplay, it simply felt off from what I had grown used to. Aiming, however, is a pretty small complaint. Overall, my biggest gripe with Metal Gear Solid 4's gameplay was that it felt too linear. While Metal Gear Solid certainly isn't known for having the most expansive areas, I often felt although I was walking in circles, even though I was actually progressing through the area. In Metal Gear Solid 3, each area has a unique and different landscape, from swamps to jungles to warehouses, and the big shell of Metal Gear Solid 2 was filled with tons of hidden areas and dialogue. While in Metal Gear Solid 4, the landscape in each chapter was initially interesting, it quickly got really dull. Taking out and avoiding enemies was entertaining enough, and boss fights such as Metal Gear Ray and Screaming Mantis were some of the best I'd experienced in this series, while in contrast fighting Vamp and the rest of the B&B unit felt like a drag. Segueing into villains, the cast of this game is a mixed bag. Liquid Ocelot is as melodramatic and entertaining as ever, but other foes, especially the B&B unit, are nothing but annoying. As I mentioned, Vamp is also back in this game for no reason, which to me was fine since I find him a fun villain. Vamp's powers are suddenly explained with nanomachines, which is the first example of a big problem this game has story-wise. Poor pacing and shoehorning in plot points is ultimately what puts me on the fence about this game. On one end, seeing Snake rapidly go further downhill mentally and physically throughout the game is heartbreaking, and Otacon experiences nothing but loss as usual. Metal Gear Solid is very memorable for completely shifting the story direction, but Metal Gear Solid 4 tried to pull a 180 after nearly every chapter, making the goal unclear and the plot inconsistent. Overall, the game is weak in plot until the final two acts, which typically would be enough for me to write off the game as mediocre, but in the final hours, this game is truly one of the best in the series. Throughout all this inconsistency, the one thing the game delivers and constantly is feels. At its core, to me, Metal Gear Solid 4 is about two broken men who have done nothing but suffer, and are only kept going by the duty to atone for their past sins. Solid Snake is willing to die for a cause, but also not willing to die until he sees everything through. He ultimately is spending the whole game on the verge of death, ready to die the moment it's over because he really knows nothing else. This is the part where we'll get into the spoilers and the darker aspects of the game, so if you haven't beaten the game, I recommend to click off, because you really don't want this spoiled. In the end, Snake's final mission is to turn the gun on himself, no one knowing what will become of him except Otacon. It's such a heart-wrenching ending. Although he doesn't claim his life and is finally given closure and forgiveness from Big Boss, the game ultimately closes on Snake going on to live what little time he has left as a shadow of the past. Those who are close to Snake will remember him and carry on his story, but in the end I couldn't help but feel that Snake deserves so much more from life. And that's how this game made me cry. Not choking back tears like the end of Snake Eater, full-on sobbing in the middle of the night in front of my PS3. Maybe it's just me in particular, but I tend to find myself focusing on the emotional aspects of stories most. Anyways, in contrast to Snake's incredible amount of depth in this game, majority of the supporting cast fell flat. Meryl is cool for about 5 seconds. They tried to turn Johnny from actual comic relief to an actual character meant to be taken seriously, which is very much forced. They could have married Meryl off to literally anyone else. Naomi was interesting. In a sense, she suffered the same fate as Sniper Wolf. She had a two-sided sort of romance with Otacon, both helping him and working against him. She takes a lot of questionable actions, but I can't say I'm a fan of her, but I can't say I hate her either. Ultimately, there is goodwill behind her actions, and she too suffers an undeserving fate. How I feel about Naomi parallels my feelings about the rougher parts of this game. I've talked how much I loved the later half, but the earlier half of the game is a slog. Anyone who's played Metal Gear Solid 4 can tell you Act 3 is a particularly big low in the game, as it's basically taking a painfully long walk to face a tedious boss fight. I really keep running myself in circles in here, talking about the constant ups and downs of this game. Honestly, I could go on forever nitpicking this game. In the end, Metal Gear Solid 4 is simultaneously the best and worst of the series. There are things I hate, things I love, and all sorts in between in Metal Gear Solid 4. But at the end of the day, I'd say it's certainly worth it to play if you're a fan of Metal Gear. Although it's a bit turbulent to get to the later half of the game, it delivers an emotional and fitting ending to the story of a hero who didn't even have a face to call his own. Much like the journey of Solid Snake in his final days, Metal Gear Solid 4 is an initially tormenting experience that blooms into one of a peaceful and bittersweet finale.
A witness? Yeah. Someone on the outside to bear witness to your final days. Someone to pass on your story. Not that I'm the only witness. But I'll remember everything you were, and stick with you to the end.
Otacon.
Besides, you wouldn't let me suffer Sonny's eggs alone, would you?